Welcome back to our channel. Tonight, we have a truly spine-chilling story for you that takes place in a small town in the U.S., known for its eerie mist and haunted streets. This story is about Street 21, a road that holds dark secrets and terrifying legends. So, sit tight and listen closely. You might think twice before walking down a dark, empty street after hearing this one. Let's begin. In a quiet, secluded corner of the United States lies a small town called Winston Falls, with a population of no more than 500 people. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where people's lives moved slowly, and the nights felt endless, especially during the cold winters. The winters in Winston Falls were particularly haunting, as the mist rolled in thick and heavy after the sunset. It was a peaceful town, but like all small towns, it had its share of dark secrets. Winston Falls had one road in particular that stood out from the rest: Street 21. Located on the outskirts of town, Street 21 ran adjacent to an old, abandoned Jewish graveyard that had been there for generations. The street had gained a terrifying reputation over the years, as locals whispered about the strange occurrences that took place there. People claimed that Street 21 was haunted, that eerie voices could be heard echoing from the graveyard even during the day. Shadowy figures were often seen moving through the mist, and anyone foolish enough to walk down the street at night was said to disappear. Some believed these stories were true. Others dismissed them as nothing more than legends. But no one, not even the bravest souls in town, dared to walk through Street 21 after dark. Despite these chilling tales, there were a few rational thinkers who believed the street wasn't haunted by ghosts or demons. Instead, they thought it was a prime spot for robbers and looters who took advantage of the street's eerie reputation to scare people away. Whether it was supernatural or not, the residents of Winston Falls all agreed on one thing: avoid Street 21 at night. John, a 34-year-old man, had recently moved to Winston Falls. He wasn't a believer in ghosts or superstitions. John had been hired as a cashier at the local store, which sat right in the heart of the town. He was new to the area and didn't pay much attention to the stories and rumors about haunted streets or cursed places. His focus was on his job and making a good impression at work. John's job often required him to work late hours, sometimes staying as late as 11 p.m. Luckily, he always had his co-worker Mike with him. Mike lived nearby, and the two would ride home together after their shifts. They always took the longer route home, steering clear of Street 21, just as they had been advised by their boss and co-workers. But John didn't believe in such nonsense. To him, it was just another street, no different from any other. One particular winter night, after a long day at the store, John's routine was disrupted. Mike had to leave work early for a personal matter, leaving John to close up the store on his own. By the time John locked up and stepped outside, it was already past midnight, and the cold winter air bit at his skin. The streets were empty, and not a single cab was in sight. In those days, services like Uber didn't exist, and Winston Falls was too small to have reliable transportation options at that hour. John was left with no choice but to walk home. He began his walk, pulling his jacket tight against the cold, thick mist that seemed to cling to the ground. Normally, he would have taken the longer route, as he and Mike always did, but tonight he was exhausted. The idea of walking an extra 20 minutes in the freezing cold didn't appeal to him. John's thoughts drifted to Street 21. It was the quickest route home, a straight shot that would cut his walk nearly in half. He hesitated for a moment, recalling the warnings and stories about the street, but then he shook his head. "It's just a bunch of nonsense," he thought. "Ghosts? Really? I'll be home in no time." With his decision made, John turned onto Street 21, stepping into the misty darkness. The street was even quieter than usual, with only a dim streetlight near the entrance of the old Jewish graveyard casting a pale glow. The mist swirled in the air, making it difficult to see far ahead. The cold wind whistled through the trees, and the only sound was the crunch of John's boots on the gravel road. As John walked deeper into Street 21, an uneasy feeling crept over him. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that it was just the cold and the late hour playing tricks on his mind. But then he heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were faint at first, barely noticeable, but they were there. It was as if someone was walking just behind him, matching his pace. John stopped in his tracks, and the footsteps stopped with him. He turned around quickly, his heart racing, but there was no one there. The street behind him was empty, just as it had been when he started walking. He chuckled nervously, shaking his head. "You're just hearing things," he told himself, and he continued walking. But as he walked, the footsteps started again, this time louder, more deliberate. John's heart began to pound in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He quickened his pace, hoping to get off the street as soon as possible. But the faster he walked, the louder the footsteps grew. Panic set in. John turned around again, his breath coming in quick gasps, but once again there was no one there. The mist hung thick in the air, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. His pulse raced as he tried to calm himself. "It's just your mind playing tricks," he whispered. But deep down he knew something wasn't right. As John turned to continue walking, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a shadowy figure standing by the gate of the graveyard. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at it, frozen in place. The figure was dark and indistinct, barely visible through the mist, but it was there. John's rational mind fought to dismiss it. "It's just a shadow," he thought. "Maybe a trick of the light." But as he watched, the shadow began to move toward him. Slowly, deliberately it approached, its movement smooth and unnatural. Fear surged through John's body. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like they were stuck in place. The shadow drew closer, and as it stepped into the dim light of the street lamp, John saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't human. The figure had a burned, deformed body, its skin charred and twisted as if it had been through a terrible fire. Its face was grotesque, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow with a malevolent light. It stared at John, its gaze full of hatred and anger. John's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He turned and ran, his feet pounding the pavement as he sprinted down the street. Behind him, he could hear the sound of inhuman laughter, a twisted, gurgling sound that chilled him to the bone. The creature was following him, its footsteps quick and heavy. John ran as fast as he could, his lungs burning and his legs aching. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the creature gaining on him, its twisted form moving with unnatural speed. He pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he desperately searched for a way out. Up ahead, he saw headlights. An old truck was coming down the street from the opposite direction. John screamed for help, waving his arms frantically as he ran toward the truck. The truck slowed down, and the driver, an elderly man, rolled down his window. John reached the truck just as the creature was almost upon him. He threw himself into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind him. "Drive!" he shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "Go! Go, now!" The old man didn't ask any questions. He put the truck in gear and sped down the road, leaving the mist and the creature behind. John sat in the seat, his heart still racing as he tried to catch his breath. The old man glanced at him, his expression serious. "You were on Street 21, weren't you?" John nodded, unable to speak. The man shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive. That road's cursed. You should never have gone down there, especially not at night." As the truck rumbled down the road, John sat in stunned silence. the events of the night replaying in his mind. He had always been a rational thinker, a man who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But after what he had just experienced, he wasn't so sure anymore. From that night on, John never walked down Street 21 again. He avoided it at all costs, and even asked his manager to change his shifts so he wouldn't have to leave work after dark. He didn't care what others thought. He knew what he had seen, and he wasn't about to tempt fate again. The people of Winston Falls continued to whisper about Street 21, warning newcomers to stay away from the haunted road. Most of them listened, but every now and then someone would dismiss the stories as just legends, until it was too late. And that's our story for tonight, folks. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.